to the content.
Thank you.
Okay. I think it's a small meeting. So the title of this lecture is The Legal Story of Investing in China, in mainland China. And I will talk about the two stories. It took around 1 hour to give this lecture. And when I come here, one of my colleagues, who is Su Linlin, is my friend and colleague, and we worked there for several months. Yeah. So I will go to the content. The first story is, in fact, there are cases that I dealt with in mainland China. They are real cases, but in order to protect the privacy of the client, I made some amendments. But the scenario are true. The first one is from the very beginning, the foreign investor invested in China, and it lasted for around 10 years. Finally, the foreign investor withdrew, and it tended to be a totally Chinese company. And the second story is the experience of foreign investment in SOE. SOE is the short word of state-owned enterprises. You know, as in Russia, in China, there are many SOEs. Because of historical reasons, some companies are owned by the government, so this is called SOE. Usually, SOEs are very good companies as they usually operate very legally in order to avoid a big punishment. And the assets are always very good. But the procedure of taking over SOE is not so easy, as it's related to whether the state interests have been harmed. I will talk about the three experiences under the foreign takeover. So let's come to the first story, which is the withdrawal after a long time struggle of foreign investor.
Sorry to interrupt, but I can't
You can't see it.
see the PowerPoint clearly. I think
Oh yeah, you should remind me earlier. Yeah, you can see it. From very beginning is in 2004 that a Russian company invested in Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a big city in Guangdong province, and I worked there for several years, so I'm quite familiar with that place. And the registered capital is $10 million, and the scope of business is to produce some electronic devices, and there are 4 foreign directors. In fact, these directors may not live in China, but it's permissible for foreigners who do not live in China that can act as directors. And the method for the Russian company to set up the Shenzhen company is to buy some assets of another company, and at the same time they had the laborers who are employees from another company.
Sorry, это инвестирование в Китай, this is...
Да.
Yeah. Do you mind me to speak in English?
Yes, I understand.
We'll just start for my 5 minutes. So I'm talking about the first story, which is about a foreign company who set up a Chinese company, and over a long period, the foreign investors withdraw from that investment. Yeah, the method is very important as it decides the taxation and some other important issues. You know, the starting point is 2004. After 4 years, the Russian company set up a Russian Shanghai company. In other words, it has two subsidiaries in mainland China. The first one is Shenzhen company, and the second is Shanghai company. The reason why the Russian investor set up a new company, and we explain later. After 1 month, that the Russian company set up a new subsidiary. The Russian company transferred all the shares that it holds of the Shenzhen company to the new Shanghai company. And 2 years later, and the Russian company transferred its shares to another company, which is also a foreign company.
Excuse me.
Yeah. I made a picture, it's very easier to understand it. Previously in 2004, a Russian company set up a Shenzhen company. And yeah, this is the border. And they set up a new company, which in 2008, then it transferred the shares from Shenzhen company to Shanghai company. Now it owns 100% of the Shenzhen company shares. So it will change it to be this Russian company, Shanghai company, and the Shenzhen company. Both of them are 100 wholly foreign-owned enterprises. The reason for this change is in order to transfer the shares of the Shenzhen company to another company, the buyer, a new buyer. So there are two methods to transfer the Shenzhen company's shares. The first one is to transfer the shares from Shanghai company to the new buyer. This is one method. The other method is transfer the Shanghai company's shares to the new buyer. The Russian investor choose the second method. In fact, they didn't transfer the Shenzhen company shares rather than transferring the Shanghai company's shares into the new buyer. The reason could be several ones. First one is the procedure to get it approved from the authority may be easier. They think in Shanghai, its economy is more advanced than some other places. So they transferred the shares to Shanghai company's shares to a new buyer. At the same time, as Shanghai company owns 100% of Shenzhen company shares, so it means that Shenzhen company shares were also transferred to the new buyer. So the new structure is like this. Russian company has run out of the picture, has gone out, and the new buyer who owns Shanghai company shares. Shanghai company owns Shenzhen company shares, both of them 100%. So from this transfer, the buyer owned the Shanghai company, and at the same time, Shenzhen company was a second subsidiary of the buyer. So we call it 金蝉脱壳 in Chinese. In fact, the Shenzhen company's shareholder is still the Shanghai company, but the real control of the Shenzhen company have changed from Russian company to the new buyer. It's a very good way to transfer the shares, as it's not so obvious. We know that if we transfer 100% shares to another new buyer, the employees of the previous original company may get worried. They worry their future. For example, whether they will be hired continually, or whether their wage will be decreased. But if they change the Shanghai company shares, everything is almost the same as the previous ones. Nothing changed. Just on that level, something changed, but no one knows it. After transferring the shares, they changed the name of the Shenzhen company as the original directors. So by doing this, they controlled Shenzhen company. In China, in order to control a company, you need to get the director's post. Usually there are 3 or 5 directors in Chinese companies. It also could be 1 director, but in order to divide the controlling power, it's better to have 3 directors. And if you can control more than 2 of the 3 directors, you control the operation power of a new company. The name, of course, it will be changed as it's a new buyer. It will not use the previous company's name. In fact, it's a German company in the real case, and the Russian company, in fact, is a U.S. company. In order to protect the confidential information and change their name. So by doing this, they control the company without transferring the shares of the company. It's a clever method to do the share transfer. There could be method very simple. There could be 3 ways to have an investment structure. The first model is very direct. Just like a foreign company invests in China. It's a very simple one, but it may have some shortcomings. For example, the operation of capital may not be so smoothly as the other 2 models. The second model is the 3 levels. The first one is the real foreign investor. The second level is a specific purpose vehicle. We call it SPV. It was set up in China, and the real company is here. So the SPV is just as a company to control the shares, to hold the shares of the real operating company. And the third model is more usually used than the 2 others. Usually the foreign investor would set up as SPV company in Hong Kong, and then use the Hong Kong company to invest in China. As we know that Hong Kong is a free port, and its level of taxation is much lower than the tax of China. In my memory, is around 15% of the profit tax, and in China, the percent would be a quarter of the profits that you gain monthly or yearly. So the difference is 10% of the share rate, tax rate. Also, if you use the Hong Kong company as a holding company, you can transfer the shares more easily than the second model, just as this structure. In this structure, if you want to change the Shanghai company shares to another buyer, you need to get approval of Shanghai authority. But if it's Hong Kong company, you may not get the approval. You just transfer it after registration with the company registry of Hong Kong. So the procedure would be more easy than the Shanghai company structure. So the last model is more usually used. In fact, these are just very simple structures. Just look at this. It's a company which had been listed in Hong Kong Stock Exchange market, and it has 7 levels of the shareholding structure. This is the final holders, and this is the real operating company. The reason why they make it so complicated could include they may use it to establish a trust. When a trust can protect their interests, sometimes they can make their assets not known by others. So trust is a very important tool to realize their aim. Also, for the taxation reason, they make the structure more less taxation burden. For example, it's Cayman Island. The taxation is very low. Almost there is no profit tax in that island. But nowadays, it was criticized by some other countries, like Persia, is more heavier than previously. Now I want to talk about the model of investment. Under Chinese law, there are two models. The first one is by transferring of shares. The second is buying assets. We know a company, as a company, it has shares which was held by its shareholders. It could be several percent. Then it has assets. If you want to buy the shares of that company, then you can control everything of that company. For example, the trademark property or the real estate property, or even its employees. But if you just buy several important assets, you can only get that assets. So that's the difference between the transfer of shares and the transfer of assets. But there also has some benefits of transferring of assets. For example, if you get some key assets, then you can leave the burden. For example, the company may have some debts owing to other third party. But if you get the assets, the third party would not chase you to ask you for payment, as you only buy assets out. So the burden is still leave to the original company. You can use these assets to set up a new company, just as the case that I mentioned here. You just buy the assets and take over all the employees. So it leaves the burden to the original company. It's a clever method. To transfer of shares, there are also two ways. The first way is just buy shares from the shareholder. And the second way is to issue more shares. For example, if the original share is 1 million, then you can issue to 1.5 million shares. And this 0.5 is the new shares issued to the new shareholder. So these two ways depends on the original capital of that company. If it has been very huge, it may be better to transfer the shares. For example, you can transfer 0.5 million to the new shareholder. Then the pool is still 1 million. It will not change. But if you issue new shares, it will increase some percent that you have designed. As to the transfer of assets, there are also two ways. The first way is to set up a new company. Set up a new company and buy assets from another company. The procedure is like this. You need to set up a new company and put money into this company, and the money will be used to buy the assets. This is the first way. And second way is the foreign investor. This is the foreign investor. And the second way is foreign investors just buy assets directly and use these assets to invest into a new company. So the assets will come into a new company. Up to the two different ways, the procedure is different. The first one is setting up a company. You need to get approval from the authority. We also call it a MOFCOM. Ministry of Commerce in China is a very powerful institution. It's in charge of the foreign investment. And the second way, you need to buy assets at first, then you invest the assets as the contribution to the new company. You also need to get the approval of the MOFCOM. MOFCOM. So these are two ways on Chinese law. There are no other ways could be used. The reason to decide which way to use, the most one is the taxation issue. Under Chinese law, there are some special regulations which is related to the beneficial taxation. Just look at this one. If you buy the shares, the foreign investor, this is foreign investor. This is the shares of the company. If you buy shares originally this is the original shareholder, and for example, it owes 6% of the shares, and you buy the 35% of the shares from the company, and you use 85% of the payment share payment. For example, if it's 1 million, then you use shares to transfer the new shares. For example, your own company has shares, you have your own shareholder. Then you transfer the shares to this one, and it transfer its shares in this company to you. Then it transfer the shares. If it is more than 58% of 1 million, as the value of shares is 1 million. If it's more than this point, we use the transfer of shares. Then you can enjoy the tax benefits. For example, in this case, under the regulation of tax authority, you can delay the profits tax to a later period. And it's very important, as we know that, as to the investment or taking over of shares of a company, if we need to pay the money, the cash flow may be influenced, and it may invest the investment in the future. But if you use the share transfer, the profit taxation would be quite low, and you can delay the payment to any time you want. It depends on the next time you transfer the shares. So if you reach the level, there are two key points. The first one is more than 50%. The second is more than 85%. These two numbers decide whether these benefits of a taxation method could be used. As to the transfer of assets, there are the same requirements. The assets, 50% of the total assets, not rather than being shares, and it's also the percent of the share transfer. So we may be careful when you invest in China and want to buy some shares. But you need to fulfill some requirements in order to get the benefits of shares. Taxation payments. There are five factors. The first one is to be reasonable commercial aim. And you cannot use it to just circumvent the tax obligation. And the second requirement is that the 50% that I have mentioned. And the third one is after the taking over of shares, you still need to operate the company as it's previously operated. You cannot change very significantly as to the operation of the company. And the fourth one is the 85% of the transfer of shares, exchange of shares, sorry. And the last one is the original shareholder cannot transfer the shares that he gets from the exchange of shares to a third party. So if we fulfill the 5 categories, the delay of profit taxation payment would be available. But as to foreign investors, there are still 2 other requirements, just as this structure. This one is for domestic investors, but in order for the foreign investor to enjoy the delay of tax payments, you need to fulfill the requirement of any of these 2 structures. The first one is that a Russian company holds a subsidiary in China, Chinese company, and it wants to transfer. This is the border between the 2 countries. It wants to transfer the shares from the Chinese company to the Russian subsidiary. It's a Russian company either. and the transfer need to be more than half of the total shares of this Chinese company. So from the shares were owned by the Russian company, it changed the shares to this Russian company. Then you can join the delay of payment. This is the first method to get the benefits of taxation. The second one is still a subsidiary of a foreign company, this one, and it's another Chinese company. So another Chinese company could be the parent company of the Russian company, or it also could be the subsidiary of the Russian company. It's 100% owned. And if you transfer the shares of this Chinese company to this one, then it could also enjoy the delay of taxation payment. So if the scenario could fit to the requirements of law, then you can enjoy very big benefits up to the taxation issue. So that's the second story. As to the first story, I want to make a summary. Before you make an investment in China, you need to a roadmap. The roadmap is just like the model of investment as well as the structure of investment. As to the structure investment, it may influence the future of the operation of the Chinese company. For example, if you want to transfer the shares, if you have a common company, it would be easier for you to make the transfer. But if you just invest directly into China, the transfer would be long time consuming. And as to the model, it would affect the tax of the third-party debts owing to third party. So just make a roadmap before you invest in China. Add to this case that I have transferred. Previously it used just in 2004 it used the first model, just like this one. But when it decided want to transfer the shares of the company, they use the second model. So it set up a Shanghai company. Let's transfer the shares of Shanghai company to the new buyer. By doing this, he transferred this company's shares. But if he used the third model at the very beginning, he would not tax so many times and take so many efforts to make the transfer of shares. He just can transfer the Hong Kong company shares to some third party. So there are no requirements of the approval from the MOFCOM authority. So is there any question as to the first case? In that case, it's a long-term investment, and the U.S. company invests in a province, not Shenzhen, and made it up. And it takes more than 10 years. Finally, the foreign investor decided to withdraw. I'm still talking about the first case. So if there are no questions, I will move to the second story. The second story is a procedural point, which is a foreign company to buy shares of state-owned company of China. Usually the SOE has very excellent assets, and their operation is usually more legally than some other companies, because as SOE they are audited by the authority all the time. So if you want to buy some SOE's assets, you can log in some websites, just as this one, Beijing Property Exchange market. On that market, there are lists of shares or assets that are planned to be sold to new buyer. But it's in Chinese. In this case, which is one of my clients, it's SOE at a very top level. It owns second company's shares. Second company, Beijing company, and Shenzhen company. It's Beijing company is a wholly owned company, and the Beijing company owns 80% of the shares of Shenzhen company. So as it's a SOE, this is also a SOE, even though it has been 2 levels after this one, because it invests in this company and this company reinvests in another company. So it's also a SOE in China. So when the Beijing company decided to sell the shares of the Shenzhen company, it could not sell just as some private companies, because these assets belong to the country, belong to the state. In order to avoid the loss of benefits of the state, it had to go through a procedure. The procedure is a public procedure. You need to tell the public that I want to sell the shares of this company, and it also needs to hire some accounting firm to audit the assets of this company, and also make it and put it on the list of the documents which will be disclosed to the public. So everyone can log in this website and see the assets, the financial situation of this new company. And if you want to decide to buy the shares of this company, then you can contact this company and to sign a contract, transfer of shares agreement. As a foreign company, for example, if a Russian investor want to buy the shares of a Shenzhen company, they need to have the share transfer agreement at first. And then after signing the agreement, you need to get the approval of MOFCOM, the Ministry of Commerce in China. And after getting the approval, they will sign the final contracts. As the approval, it will decide whether the contract will be valid. If the MOFCOM refuses to recognize the transfer of shares, then the contract would be invalid in China. So the approval is very important, almost the most important procedure to foreign investment. So after make payment, they will get a certificate to prove the truth of this exchange. The approval will be issued by the Beijing Property Exchange Institute. So after buying the shares, there are following procedures. The first one is to exchange of the share registration of the shareholders. We know that a company has original shareholder, and if we want to sell the shares to a new buyer, then the new buyer will be the shareholder of this company. You need to make a change of the registration. We'll go to this institution, which is called a Ministry of Industry and Commerce. This institute is in charge of the registration of companies' information. In Russian, I know it is the taxation authority that is in charge of these issues. So, but the procedure is very time-consuming, in fact, as it's related to SOEs. As it's SOE's assets, the authority, which is a Ministry of Industry and Commerce, is very cautious. They need to avoid being punished or being criticized for allow the transfer of